Mr. Guy Berger, Director of the Division of Freedom of Expression and Media Development at the UNESCO. Welcome to Tunis.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in a country that had a peaceful election and which is building a new media system.
Tell us more about your experience in South Africa. What is basically the difference between the media in your country after 1994 and the experience here in Tunisia after the 14th of January?
On the one hand, South Africa had a propaganda media, especially the state broadcaster, before democracy. Afterwards, that broadcaster had to change to become more neutral. It's not yet perfect. Sometimes it still does some problems, but it has improved. But there are many new broadcasters also. So in the totality, the citizens have many more choices. So they don't depend only on the one broadcaster anymore. And I think Tunisia, I see you have new broadcasters also beginning to rise here. I wish them success. And I see also that your state broadcaster is beginning to try to change to become not a propaganda broadcaster, but something that will be of service to the people.
Do you think diversity is important at this stage here in Tunisia?
It's a very important thing from my experience in South Africa. You have to do two things. One is reconciliation and nation building, but number two, to also respect the diversity. If you leave one of those out, you have a problem. You have to make sure that the whole diversity of views is there reflected in the media system as a whole. And at the same time, you have to remind people we are still one. We are one nation, even with all the diversity. So that becomes very important.
As a South African, do you believe reconciliation is possible between the victims and their aggressors, between the victims and the people who were in power in the past?
Maybe the word reconciliation is strong. Reconciliation is the situation in South Africa, but I would say it is more a situation of let us look to the future, let us not settle the scores of the past. And so I will not say there is a great love between the former oppressed and the former oppressors. There's still some suspicion, still some doubt about the motives, about the support for a change. But there's peace, because if the idea was to take revenge, that did not happen. And so I think revenge would have continued more conflict in the country. Now there's tension, but not conflict.
So what is your advice to the people here in Tunisia and also to the media? Because I think the role of the media is very important, and you've been talking about the media in your country and the media all over the world. So where is this advice?
Well, I think from my experience in South Africa, it's very important to have a pluralism of media. So that means that the citizens can, if they do not like one medium, they can choose another one. If they like a very conservative media, it is there for them. If they like a more liberal one, it is there for them. And that they all respect that you can have a tolerance of the diversity. That is the most important thing for a society, to have the cohesion. Because if one group feels there's no media for it, it becomes a problem for everybody.
Does this mean you believe in partisanship? That if people, if the media want to side with one political party, they have the freedom to do it, as it's the case in some countries like the United States?
I believe certainly in newspapers it should be free to decide, and it is for the readers of the newspaper to say they like it or they don't like it. Of course, some newspapers will say, if we are too partisan, we lose readers. We should be more neutral, or we should be more independent to have our own views and our own position. and therefore maybe we support no parties. But it should be free for the newspapers to decide and then for the readers to decide. When you come to broadcasting, it's a little bit different because not everybody can have a broadcast station, because a broadcast station requires a frequency.
Funds and a frequency.
Funds and frequency. There are limits to frequencies. For example, you take FM 95.7. Only one station can be an FM 95.7.
Yes.
So therefore, because it's a public resource and only one person can use it, or one company, there should be some conditions there.
Yes.
Those conditions should require some independence and some fairness. So I think partisanship in broadcasting is not a good idea, even for private broadcasting. I don't believe in partisanship because of it's a public resource. Especially now, if you come to the media that is the broadcast is owned by the state on behalf of the people, there should not be political partnership. Then they must be very, very fair. They should have NGOs that are monitoring them. There should be some regulation that makes sure that they are now reflecting the totality of the views in the society.
So you believe in regulations. We need regulations in the media. It should be free. So we should have the freedom of expression, but there should be some rules in order to organize the field.
I would say that there should be some rules for state-owned broadcasting, the public broadcasting. There should be some fewer rules for private broadcasting, and there should be very few rules for the private press and for the internet, because these are different animals. So you need some rules,
yes,
but differently applied for different kinds of media. And those rules also, they need to, this is very important, they must respect the international law and international jurisprudence and international standards. When is it legitimate to make a limitation on freedom of expression? Because internationally there are some things and there are some conditions. So for example, it may be legitimate to limit on national security, but first of all it must be proven that it is necessary. It must be explained why it's necessary. There must be the ability to appeal that process by an independent body, and so on. The same thing, for example, if there's hatred, internationally it's legitimate to limit some hatred or call for violence.
Yeah.
But again, even then, it's important. It must be proportionate. It must be in the law. It must be appealable. You cannot have a situation where a government can interpret in its own interest these questions. It must be something that the courts, as independent bodies, can make some judgment on, because always there's a grey area, and of course many governments will try to exploit the grey area to reduce freedom of expression, not for a legitimate purpose, but for the purposes of protecting their power or for hiding corruption or such.
Do you think after revolutions, grey areas are still possible?
Oh, very much.
Do you think there's room for grey areas even today?
Oh, very much. Things are very grey. Before a revolution, it is black and white. The good guys, the bad guys. After the revolution, it becomes very complicated. Some of the good guys, they begin to become bad. Some of the bad guys become good. And so it's very grey. And the question before you had no freedom of expression, now you do, but what are the limits? It's a very uncertain time. But that is freedom. Freedom is something where people have a choice. If you don't like choice, then you don't want freedom. Then you let somebody make the decisions for you.
Okay, Mr. Berger, tell us more about your role at the UNESCO.
Well, I'm new to UNESCO, but I'm Director of Freedom of Expression and Media Development. Now, UNESCO is an organization it's an international organization. More than 190 countries are members of UNESCO. It's like the United Nations, but it is dealing with culture questions, media questions, education, and science. So my job is to say to governments, you know, when you made this organization, you all agreed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That declaration says freedom of expression. If there are limitations, very limited limitations. So sometimes the international community must go and remind itself and remind some members,
Yes.
this is what we agreed,
Mm-hmm.
so we have to support it. So part of my job is to assist and say, well, what is happening? If a journalist is being killed, as has happened now in Syria, as happening very much in Mexico,
Yes.
what is the government doing to protect journalists? Because if a journalist is killed, it's a loss of that person's life, it's terrible. But for the society, it's worse, because the society loses one more person who can gather information,
You can contribute.
who can contribute. So it becomes very important for freedom of expression. There should be safety of journalists. So UNESCO, we have a big campaign to say to governments, you must do more. Too many times a journalist is killed and no action is taken to get the killers. Sometimes those killers are even in the government. But the governments have to live up to their responsibility. So we have a program there on the safety of journalists. Then we are assisting with the training of journalists. We assist with the journalism schools to make them better, they can do better work. And then media development, we have a fund, and we are giving some small monies to small media projects, community media. How can they make a better use of cell phones in their radio programs, for example? How can they become more successful at attracting advertising? How can they do better journalism on HIV/AIDS? Those are the questions. So we have some small money and we give it to radio stations that make application.
Could you tell us more about the conference which will be organized here in Tunis on 3rd of May?
Sure. UNESCO is the international agency that has the responsibility to promote press freedom. In 1991, 20 years ago, UNESCO had a conference in Namibia, in Windhoek. And there, UNESCO brought together independent journalists. And these journalists said, we want a World Day on freedom of the press on the 3rd of May. So UNESCO said, very good, we support that. United Nations also agreed. So that is why today, 3 May, is World Press Freedom Day. This year, 100 countries had activities. One of the big activity, maybe the biggest one, is organized by UNESCO itself. Of course, many other stakeholders do their own activities, but UNESCO every year it chooses one country and it has a big event, it makes a big declaration, it has a big press freedom prize. So next year, on the 3rd of May, we will bring the world's media to Tunisia to celebrate press freedom here in this country, and to say what is the experience of Tunisia in helping to create a new system for this country. What does it mean to have a free press, free broadcasting, free newspapers, free internet? What are the limits? How do you encourage new media for young people, media in the small towns? How do you change the state broadcaster to become a good public broadcaster? All these questions. So we will debate these here in Tunisia on the 3rd of May next year. And then we have international journalists, they will come and share their experience.
What is your message to the Tunisian people and expats who are listening to you today?
I would say you have a wonderful time in Tunisia today. You have the window is open, the light is coming in. Often what happens is that after a revolution, after 3 years, some people try to close that window and they try to close the curtains again. It happens very often in a revolution. So you have to be sure that in the short time you have of 2 years or 3 years, you make a system. If somebody wishes to close the window or to pull the curtains, you need to have some laws, some systems, and the culture of the people must say, we never want to go backwards. We can only go forwards. Sometimes, maybe there will be times when it is legitimate to close those curtains, but it must be under very strict conditions, if it ever happens. Otherwise, keep your freedom of expression. It's very important. If you do not have freedom of expression, you cannot be a full human being. If you are living in fear of expressing yourself, it's not a way to live.
Mr. Guy Berger, thank you very much.
Thank you.